PHI 203. You're welcome to study session 3. Branches of ethics. In this study session, we will examine the branches of ethics, which are meta-ethics, normative ethics, and applied ethics. Learning outcomes. When you have studied this session, you should be able to describe the following branches of ethics: meta-ethics, normative ethics, and applied ethics. Meta-ethics. Going by its etymology, the word meta means beside, after, behind, beyond, transcending, or above. Therefore, we can define meta-ethics as the branch of ethics which inquire into the meaning, nature, type, justification, and source or origin of moral norms or moral standards. In other words, meta-ethics seek to find out the explanations behind or at the base of moral norms. Meta-ethics does not pass moral judgments by stating which actions are morally right or which are morally wrong. It rather merely tries to raise questions about the meaning, nature, and source of a moral standard. Meta-ethics is also concerned with the nature of moral judgments and whether they are objectively true or not. In the 20th century, it was believed in analytical philosophy that the whole content of ethics is meta-ethics. This stems from a distinction identified from fact and value, or between is and ought, in this school of thought. Fact refers to a description of a state of affairs, while value is believed to involve the ideal and a prescription of that ideal. In analytical philosophy, it is held that philosophy is an abstract intellectual inquiry, and so does not have any business with value. Put differently, philosophy is held to be value neutral. In other words, analytical philosophy relies on this distinction to reach the conclusion that the whole of ethics is meta-ethics. On the other hand, it is indeed held that meta-ethics could in fact be value neutral. It is explained that an analysis of the nature of morality does not entitle or force on to make moral judgments or moral conclusions. This means, in essence, that only an analysis of morality is expected of meta-ethics. It needs not reach conclusions or take a position. Normative ethics. Normative ethics is the branch of ethics that is concerned with setting the criteria or standards of good moral conduct. The standards that people hold about what is good or bad, right or wrong, and beneficial or evil affect almost all other things that they do. In an attempt to avoid what is morally bad or encourage what is morally good, people refer to moral standards. Those moral standards are given by normative ethics in accordance with three main approaches to moral theories. The three approaches are teleological or consequentialist theories, deontological theories, and virtue ethics. Normative ethics, hence, is basically concerned with the standards of good moral conduct. How to arrive at these good standards and justifications of good moral standards. Normative ethics, therefore, helps in making right choices or in judging our moral decisions through certain ethical theories, teleological ethical theories. Teleological or consequentialist theories are those ethical theories that see the goodness or badness of moral actions in terms of the consequences or the result that they bring about. They judge an action to be morally right if the result it generates is beneficial, and consider it bad if its result is evil, painful, or harmful. For example, a type of consequentialist theories known as hedonism. The consequences of any particular action is measured in terms of the pleasure or pain it generates. In other words, for a hedonist, an action is considered to be morally good only if it is able to bring about a greater balance of pleasure over pain. In like manner, if an action brings about or is likely to bring about more pain than pleasure, then such an action is considered to be morally bad. Basically, we have three main types of hedonism. The first is psychological hedonism, which holds that all that human beings pursue is pleasure. Or put differently, that humans, being who they are constantly in pursuit of pleasure while trying to avoid pain. The other is evaluative hedonism, which holds that what we should pursue or try to maximize is pleasure and strive towards an avoidance of pain. Ethical hedonism is a form of evaluative hedonism. Lastly, we have reflective hedonism, which is of the view that the only thing that gives value to anything is pleasure. Examples of hedonists include Epicurus, Jeremy Bentham, and John Stuart Mill. Epicureanism, a school of philosophy founded in the Hellenistic period by the ancient philosopher Epicurus, is a form of hedonistic consequentialist theory. The theory holds that pleasure is the only good thing that should be sought for. On the other hand, pain is the only evil which man innately desires to avoid and should be avoided because it is evil all through and through. Nevertheless, it is important to note that Epicurus does not encourage sensual pleasure. Rather, he rates mental pleasure very high. Apart from hedonism, we also have another type of consequentialist theory, which advocates that the goodness or badness of an action is to be measured according to the happiness or unhappiness its consequences produce. This is known as eudaimonism. For a eudaemonist, an action is a morally good action if the consequences of the action bring about or can bring about a greater balance of happiness over unhappiness. And a bad action is an action that brings greater unhappiness than happiness. An example of a consequentialist ethical theory is ethical utilitarianism. Ethical utilitarianism is a consequentialist theory which holds that a morally good action is that which brings about a greater amount of good than evil for the majority of people. On the other hand, an action which brings about a greater balance of evil for a greater number of people, or which only brings about a greater balance of good over evil for fewer people. Another example of consequentialist theory is ethical egoism. This is a type of ethical consequentialist theory that posits that a morally good action is that which generates a greater good for the self or the moral agent, while an action is morally bad if it does not favor the moral agent or the self. Deontological ethical theories. Deontological theories are the ethical theories which do not rely on consequences or results to determine the rightness or wrongness of an action. Deontological theories, in other words, focus on certain qualities of the moral standard to weigh the moral statutes of an action. Deontological theories appeal to such things as rules, right, duty, logical consistency, and obligation to determine the moral status of an action. An example of a deontological theory is Immanuel Kant's categorical imperative. According to categorical imperative, an action is morally right if and only if the moral agent can wish it to be made a universal rule without being involved in self-contradiction. Furthermore, Kant's categorical imperative also holds to be morally right an action that treats human beings as an end in themselves rather than as a means to another end. Like every other deontological theory, you will notice that Kant's theory does not appeal to the fact that the outcome of an action chosen in line with the rules given is anything to consider in choosing the action. Another deontological theory is the divine command theory of morality, which holds that what is morally right is what God permits and commands, and that what is morally wrong is what God forbids, not minding the consequences involved. Virtue ethics. Virtue ethics is the type of normative ethics which places emphasis on the moral status of a moral agent rather than merely on a moral action. Of vital importance to virtue ethics are issues like character and good life. Socrates, for example, sees a link between the ignorance of a moral agent and wrongdoing. Aristotle also, in his Nicomachean Ethics, encourages that one should develop oneself into a moral person because only a moral person can do what is morally good. To be a moral person, Aristotle holds that such a person should regularly choose to do what is morally good. In line with the mean, among questions that virtue ethics raises are what is the good life? How should one live? What type of person should one be? And so on. Applied ethics. Applied ethics refer to the branch of ethics which examines the moral status of concrete social issues. It does this by using ethical theories which we have in normative ethics to assess practical issues of everyday life. When faced with making moral decision on any particular or definite moral issue, more often than not, we usually desire to know what the moral status of such an issue generally is. For example, we ask whether it is always wrong to kill, cheat, lie, go for an abortion, assist with euthanasia, use up the environment, and so on. Also, we usually desire to know whether some of those practical moral issues are occasionally justifiable or not. Some fundamental issues in applied or practical ethics. Applied ethics deals with different social and political moral issues, which for the purpose of convenience have been put in groups. The groups have been so constituted to deal with issues of similar concerns. Some of the groups include bioethics, gender ethics, sexual ethics, journalism ethics, infoethics, professional ethics, business ethics, and environmental ethics. Bioethics, medical ethics, and genetics deals with the morality of issues like abortion, euthanasia, allocation of scarce resources in the health sector, human experiments, genetics testing and screening, cloning, and so on. In this sense, questions that are of interest include whether it is morally good to abort an unwanted pregnancy, whether end-of-life decisions are within the power of a doctor or his hopelessly sick patient, or whether these are beyond the bounds of their determination, or whether it is morally permissible to use humans or even animals for medical experiments and researches, and so on. Environmental ethics is the aspect of applied ethics which raises questions about the moral and appropriate ways of relating with the physical environment. For example, one of the current concerns of environmental ethics is the issue of global warming and the way we cause the ozone layer to deplete. Also, it asks whether it is moral for us to use up the environment without putting the interest of future generations into consideration, or whether we have some moral obligation towards the environment. Sexual ethics is that which looks at issues like prostitution, homosexuality, lesbianism, zoophilia, pedophilia, polygamy, etc. For example, it interests sexual ethics to know whether it is morally right to condemn homosexuals and whether prostitution can be morally justified based on some reasons, and so on. Business ethics is interested in the morality or otherwise of certain business and professional practices. For example, if the issue of whether the loyalty of a whistleblower, that is, a person who exposes wrongdoing within an organization, is supposed to be to his employer or to the public. Gender ethics is the aspect of applied ethics which is about the unequal treatment between men and women on the one hand, and an application of the standards of morality of the female gender to practical moral issues. On the other hand, for example, it promotes love, relationship, and partiality in dealing with practical moral problems in position to men's way of judging those issues, which emphasizes justice and objectivity. Study session summary. In this study session, we discuss the branches of ethics. These are meta-ethics, normative ethics, and applied ethics. We define meta-ethics as the branch of ethics which studies the often neglected or overlooked aspect of morality, which inquire into the nature of morality, as well as the meaning and sources of moral codes. We stated that normative ethics deals with the setting of moral standards through ethical theories, while applied ethics deals with concrete or practical moral issues. Such issues can be social-political, social-economic, or social-cultural in nature, and they can be concrete moral issues about interpersonal relations. We have come to the end of study session 3. Thanks for listening.